Hey, cool, awesome. I guess another week has gone by, and here we are again on the forensic happy hour. Hey, really excited here to have another forensic expert with Josh Hickman. So it should be a good time, and of course, make sure that you guys have a drink in hand because we will. So let's just, without further ado, we're going to people a good laugh, I'm sure. So anyway, I want to welcome here Josh Hickman, and excited for you to be here. I appreciate you taking the time out of your day. Obviously, you said about some weather stuff, so we'll move through this. But the first thing, obviously, that we do is we give ourselves a cheers.
Cheers.
Fantastic. All right. So what I want you to do first is, hey, tell everyone. I mean, who's Josh Hickman?
I'm not very exciting. so, uh, like your previous guest last week, I also work for Kroll. I am a senior associate there. I've been there now. I'm coming up on a year. I'm getting pretty close. But before that, I, like so many other people in our profession, came into digital forensics via law enforcement. I have about 16 years in. I did a short stint as a local police officer, and then was with our state investigative arm for the remainder of that time. And just by sheer luck and coincidence, I ended up in our computer crimes unit doing ICAC cases for those that are familiar with such things. And I caught the DFIR bug, and I left law enforcement and ended up over at our state crime lab. I was over there for right at 2 years. It's ISO 17025 environment, so it's a little bit unique coming from law enforcement to that. I know a lot of people have their own opinions about that, but I learned a lot there, and was able to do the deep dive forensics that you don't necessarily get a chance to when you're doing law enforcement, because most of the time you're just looking for the pictures and videos or chat and move on to the next case, right? So, but with the lab, it was a little bit more in depth, and I enjoyed that. So,
Yeah, and you're kind of anticipating my questions, which is great because obviously I had law enforcement experience, was there for quite some time in law enforcement, and then obviously moved over in the private side of it, and so you know I guess obviously the work is not necessarily, well, I mean, it's kind of the same, right? The objective is always the same, but it comes down to just kind of what you said, is that working on the private side, it really allows you to dive into it, right? Be able to take more time because I always remember, especially doing that forensic work in the PD. They're like, yeah, so the phone isn't that big, and so you should have it. I'm just going to sit here and wait, or you're doing the hard drive and you're doing the forensics, and they're like, okay, well, yeah, so I'll be back in a couple of days. I know that there's a lot of stuff, but just find what you need to do. And so obviously that's different. It doesn't give you a lot of time because there's an expectation of getting that stuff done, right? So based upon having more time, I mean, tell everyone, I mean, having more time, what does it allow you to do? You don't have to tell everything, but I mean, do you have a specific example of things that you can do now that you can really dive into the zeros and ones?
well, in at least here, I can only speak for Kroll, right? So, but one of the things that we do have to be cognizant of is our billable hours, right? You don't want to be chasing, dead ends and things, because time is money, and your clients are paying you to do these forensics, right? So, I do get to spend a lot of time looking at things that I just never got to look at in the criminal justice system. Log files, having to spend time decoding PowerShell. I seem to spend a lot of time in CyberChef. It's those are the things that I probably would have never done either in law enforcement or at the lab, right? So our lab wasn't necessarily tasked with doing things like intrusions or data exfil. That was beyond our mandate, and because there was only three of us for the entire state, um, you can think about all the law enforcement agencies in North Carolina. We even if we were doing that type of work, we certainly wouldn't have a sufficient amount of time to do a good job, right? Because we barely had enough time to do what we were mandated to do to begin with, and so. In the private sector, it's definitely
three guys when you were
yes,
working doing the for the
yes,
cyber stuff. Three guys.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Honestly, a lot of people, like three guys, that's it. But I mean, that could be typical, right? I mean, there's a lot of, and so, I mean, what happens now is that you have three guys that are doing it. Typically, the stuff is so backlogged, right? A lot of times, do you think, thinking of the law enforcement side of it, a lot of times, does a lot of digital evidence is like, yeah, we know how long that takes, so we're going to go and sit in this room and try to, get the guy to tell us what happened?
Uh, well, for my investigative days, absolutely right. So, part of the part of that entire investigation is in fact interviewing the person who owns the media, right? And like you said, you interview him or her and try to determine, okay, based on what they're telling you and what you know about your investigation, where is it most likely I'm going to find that stuff, right? Because when you're on scene, I mean, you're having to do triage. Because I'll give you an example. I had an individual years ago who was doing computer science work for a three-letter agency. Who, I mean, there was storage medium all over the house. I mean, every time we would flip over a pillow, I'm finding like a 64 gig thumb drive, and I'm like, oh, God, here we go. So, there was a lot of back and forth with that guy, and, the forensics at the time, the agents in that unit, we did the whole widget, right? We would do, drum up the business, go do the search warrants, seize the media, examine the media, write the report, give it to the prosecutors, and on to the next. The forensics on that took me around 9 months to do, and eventually I tapped out. And, it's one of those situations where you call the prosecutor like, all right, here's what I got,
right.
And is this enough for you to do what you need to get done, within the confines of statutes and criminal law and everything else. So, and we encountered that same situation at the lab too. There was one examiner in particular. He was actually already working on an exam when I got there, and 10 months in, he's just finding contraband all over the place. And eventually it was a phone call to the prosecutor saying, we're going to tap out if you give your blessing. And, and that's what ended up happening. Because you have to, you got to weigh that there's a balance there, right? Yeah. Find what you need, but then you always have to worry about, is there an unknown victim out there that we're not aware of?
So let's talk about that. Is I guess the tools for triage? Do you see that they're I don't want to say making a comeback, right? So the triage, there were tools, quite some time ago of really grabbing the data. But do you think that now in today's, the digital data everywhere, do you think that the triage tools right now are more important than, say 10 years ago, 5 years ago?
I think so. I mean, the storage sizes are, compared to 5 years ago, like you said, they're night and day. Right. I would have loved to have, standing at the back of my SUV, in the middle of the night trying to triage, 5 phones sitting there. I would have loved to have something like A-Leap or I-Leap.
Right.
If I'm doing a dead box, I'd love to have something like Cape sitting around, right. To be able to do that. I mean, I use Cape daily, right? And it's not just because I work at Kroll. It works. I mean, it's fantastic. And, Eric does a great job with it. Yeah, and yeah. I would have loved to have something like that because, what we would do is we'd pull the hard drive, we would hook it to the right locker, and our agency used Encase. We would just, bring it, not image it, just bring it in Encase and try to do like a quick triage real quick. Do we need to seize it? Yes, no, on to the next. So I would have loved to have the tools that are running around now. I would have loved to have had them.
Yeah, so thinking about it, remember back in the day, obviously doing it with the computer forensic stuff and going through all the courses and all the coursework. It's like, pull the plug, yank this thing out, let's do that, let's bring everything back. To now, because hey, we don't want to do anything on a live box because we don't want to go and change, we don't want to alter, we don't want to. So, I mean, getting on a live box to do say the triage now, or do things live on say a device, do you think that it's more acceptable now?
You bring up a good point. I think it is, and I think the biggest thing that it boils down to is documenting what you do and understanding what happens when you push a button or click the mouse or I hit this executable. And by extension, we talk about, from a mobile device perspective, rooting, jailbreaking. I know there's still a lot of negative connotation around those terms and what that means. But, if you look at, at least the mobile device vendors at this point, a lot of them have implemented, I always get them confused. Check rain, thank you. A lot of them have implemented that into their tool set. And so, and really that's what you're doing, right? But mobile devices are different anyway because, you've got to turn them on to be able to access the data anyhow.
Yeah.
So, but I think, getting on a live box like that is definitely, as long as you understand that.
Yeah. You can explain it, right?
What's happening.
Yeah. 100% being able to explain it, be able to document that information. Because, honestly, if you talk about rooting a device or, jailbreaking a device, right? The difference is what you have admin rights, right? You have admin rights to it. The majority of people, you understand, what has changed. And you try to explain to people, well, when you're turning on a mobile device or even a computer, obviously things change, right? The clock, it doesn't matter. It's always there. So as long as people understand, and I think you make a really good point about documentation. I think that's extremely important that people understand. So I'm going to segue into and ask your opinion on really the mentality. And again, I live in kind of the mobile space. I do computer forensics, but live in the mobile space. But do you think the training, as in having people understand really what's going on in the device, or being able to go into the hex, be able to dive into that, do you think that is it's getting better than it was, or it's getting better, it's just a little bit, but not really necessarily. I don't want to talk about standards, right? But of people actually being able to understand and then to, as in law enforcement side of it, be able to testify to that stuff. Do you think that's getting better?
I think so. I still think that there's a lot of button pushing going on. And if you, I'm not saying that's good or bad one way or the other. You certainly have to be cognizant of how much time you've got, right? In the private sector, obviously for money reasons. But when we talk about the criminal justice system, people can't be waiting around 2 or 3 years to go to trial because you're doing something right. You have a right to a fair and speedy trial. I'm trying to think of how to explain this, and I'll give you an example because I know this case is adjudicated. It was one of the last cases I worked at the lab. We had a situation. It was involving Snapchat, and there was some question about where a device was geographically located. So when we teed it up and ran it through a couple different tools, we weren't seeing what we were expecting to see. And we wanted to absolutely make sure, because somebody was going to prison for life if this was not correct. So, right. We went so far and just, went on command line with it and just started looking at it. And eventually we found what we needed. And it was one of those situations where, the data ended up assisting the defendant. The ethics part aside from all that, that type of skill set, getting down to the files, understanding what those files are, getting into the hex, sweeping the bytes and being able to decode those things, it's getting better. I don't know if it's necessarily where it needs to be, and I think as the training continues to evolve, I think you will see that it's starting to get better, because I have personally witnessed this where people have gotten on the stand and testified to some evidence, and when the defense, experts like whispering into the defense attorney's ear, and the defense attorney stands up and says, "Well, can you explain how the tool got that?" And they're like, "I just pressed the button and it popped out."
Yeah, exactly.
You don't want to be. You don't want to be that person.
Yeah,
you don't want to be that person.
Yeah, it's a look on the face like, yeah, it came from the phone. Yeah, it just all of a sudden appeared, right?
And I think that there's still some, I think the courts still have a hard time understanding some of it. Although you do have people out there that are providing like training to defense attorneys. Like I don't know if you know, like Larry Daniel, he was in the.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Larry lives on, or his shop is on the other side of the county from me, and I know that he and his son Lars go out and do CLE credit classes for attorneys, and so both sides are starting to understand it. So I think it's important for us to be able to explain it correctly, because
100% agree. 100% agree. I mean, that's really comes down to that, right? It's not necessarily a validation. I'm not going to validate the, it's not a validation of the tool necessarily. It's you understanding, where did that come from? Did it come actually, was it a write-ahead log? Is it from journal file that comes out of that, or was it in the main database? I mean, having that information is pretty important, right? Especially when you're testifying to it, and they say, no, it's not in the main database. Where? Show me. And you're like, oh, okay. Where did it come from, right? So,
and because I've heard you say it before, you go to like NW3C, there were some private, I came up in the guidance software, they show you, well, here, you've got to carve this picture out, or you got to do X, Y, and Z. And then, you're stuck there for an hour, doing it, and then it doesn't work the first time.
Right.
And then after you finally get it, and they come back, oh yeah, we got a script that'll do it for you. Just click this button.
I mean, I was so upset on day 5 of that class, man. It still irks me, and I still tell that story to everyone I can. Because I mean, it's good because it helps you understand of really what the tool is doing. Tools are developed by people, right? They write the code, they do this based upon these parameters that you have that. So that you're able to do it, right? There's no magic sauce necessarily. It's just an automated tool. So let me, obviously, I want to ask you really about, I guess, your contributions, because there's some really cool stuff that you do kind of for the community. And the people that I want to have on there are those that really are putting forward some things for the community. So tell me about, these images that you're producing, allowing people to use these public images, and so I've seen a lot of people obviously talking about this. I've gone through some of them, and I mean, it's a tremendous resource for really testing and really looking and diving into this stuff, because my whole intent, my life's goal is to make everyone a hex editor in their brain, right? Being able, everyone that can carve, obviously it's not going to happen, but this allows and gives people some awesome data. So tell everyone about that. I mean, it's a great resource.
So when I started at the crime lab here, one of the things that I was tasked with was just evaluating the current procedures as they were at the time. There was some inner turmoil there at the lab initially when I got there, and the digital function was broken away. So they wanted to basically just start, clean. And one of the things that I did to evaluate that against, what was currently accepted in the discipline at the time is I spent a lot of time, SWIG-DE, NIST, but I spent a ton of time on the blogs and DFIR Twitter, right. A ton of time. And so once everything got situated, I was like, we got so much from all that. We probably should contribute a little bit. And one of the sites that I hit was Devin Ackerman's spot about DFIR, and he still does at the time now. He's got a page dedicated to just like research needs, right? People will, put forth. And one of the things was, hey, we need an Android 7 image for public consumption with some documentation. I was like, perfect, we can do that. And it actually benefited the lab too at the time, because we needed updated data sets for mobile device tool performance verification before we put the tool into service for work. So win-win for both sides. And so we did that. Jessica Hyde kind of guided me through that whole process and the documentation portion. And, we put it out there. I slung it up on my personal OneDrive account initially. And then eventually I got Simpson Garfinkel, who, among all the other things that he does, he handles digital corpora. He agreed to hang that image there. And I was like, hey, Devin, we can do 8.2. I still got the test phone here ready to roll. So he's like, yeah, go ahead, man. Yeah. And so we did that too, and that worked out. And at the time, Android 9 was the current version, and I was like, what the heck? We're already too deep. We'll go ahead and do the third one.
Right.
Unfortunately, the phone that I had at the time couldn't run. It was my wife's old Nexus 5X. So I went out and found a used Pixel 3, teed it up, and let it rip. And those images are now hung over at Digital Corpora. Well, when Android 10 dropped, I was already gone from the lab, and I was like, you know what? This actually benefits me to some degree, because it gives me a data set to research when I have time amongst everything else that's going on. And so I did that this year. And then when the COVID lockdown, my wife had migrated from an iPhone SE to an updated iPhone. I was like, hey, guess what? I've got a spare iPhone sitting here. And
your wife hates you as much as my wife hates me.
Oh my God!
All the phones, all my kids too. I'm like, hey, go get a new phone. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll
there was something happened. She updated it, and it didn't pan out right. We could never get it to work, and I toyed with it for a while, and I was like, you know what? We've already paid this phone off. Go get another one. Right. And so I just had it sitting around, and
the light bulb just goes.
I was like, hey, I got nothing to do right now. So, I had just wrapped that. I was working on some stuff with digital well-being aspect of Android and the device personalization services. But I still was kind of sitting around with, and I was like, nobody's really done an iOS image before. So I did that, and Apple doing what it does. I started it on 13.3. They updated it to 13.4.1. I was like, this would be cool to see the delta. And that was actually something that Jessica and I had discussed way back when. So that's how it actually ended up being 2 images instead of just 1. The cool thing about that, depending on how Apple shakes out the iOS 14 list as far as what devices will work, the SE is still frozen here in my desk. I haven't done anything to it. So if it's able to run 14, I will update it and then generate a new image.
Great.
So you'll be able to see the delta, hopefully. Now, if they come back and they say, no, this one's going to fall off.
Which, you know what? Hey, it's all about money, right? So especially with the hardware side of it, and now being able to lock things down just a tad bit more. So I would anticipate something new, and then they're going to force everyone to purchase something new. But that's just me, thinking about the animal Apple, right? So
I'm surprised that some of these phones have lasted as long as they have. Now, granted, performance might be an issue, but they're still able to run it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not like you're going to be using it as your everyday time, trying to utilize it as your phone. So, it's fantastic. It is, like I said, it's huge for really the community, and I know just a ton of people have been utilizing it and really diving into it and having that information, because you can do a lot of research on a completely vanilla phone, but it really doesn't do anything for you, right? As long as you're, if you're looking at system files, you're looking at changes that are on the system, but when you start talking about interaction between applications, all of that different, that's I think where this kind of really comes into play, as in, almost working a case, right? So, it's really good. So tell me, I get this asked still to this day, do you miss law enforcement?
I heard a quote not too terribly long ago. I think it pretty much sums up my feelings about it. I miss the clowns, but I don't miss the circus.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the same thing I tell people. I'm like, you know what? I love the guys, man. I love hanging out with it, but man, It is exactly that. It can be a circus, a
Yeah,
really, really.
and if you look at everything that's going on here in the past couple months, I mean, it's amazing, and it's going to change, right?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I'll tell you that I still keep in touch with a
Yeah,
lot of the guys that I work with, but I look at just how the agency's changed since I left. Um, I still hear the grumblings and stuff, and
right.
it's amazing. And now, there's definitely another shift coming in policing.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, there's just
100%. I mean, 100% agree on that. So you mentioned it. I'm just going to ask you just a couple more questions, man. I kept you a long time because it's been fantastic. But so obviously with the COVID thing, you mentioned it already. I mean, it's given you more time to do and dive into some research. What do you think? I mean, coming out of this, and I asked this to all the guests. I mean, coming out of this, what do you think is on, say, the forensic side of it? Corporate side of it, the private side, and law enforcement. I mean, do you think that there's actually going to be more data? More applications. With people understanding and utilizing this type. Because honestly, I don't know if a lot of people are going to go back to work. They might the companies are like, hey, you can stay at home. So, I mean, do you think that that's going to foster new types of attacks, crimes, applications, way that people communicate? So it's going to produce more data so that now the forensic examiners are going to be even more busy?
I think so, to some degree, right? And I think Eric mentioned this last week on the show. And he made a fantastic point. A lot of employers are like, this actually doesn't work, right? And so maybe you need to stay home, right? It reduces some of the overhead costs for the employers, right? They don't have to have big space. But on the flip side of that, some of these employers are having to tiptoe into things that they have not had to deal with before, like properly configuring two-factor authentication
Right.
and firewalls, and I need to set this up so I don't have port 3389 exposed, and I have somebody come in over RDP. So,
Right.
I
Why is my
think
mouse moving? What's going
yeah,
on?
right. My camera's on. I don't know what's going on here.
Right.
I think that I think the attack surface is going to grow a little bit now. Whether or not you know employers invest in proper infrastructure and security, that is completely up to them. Um, I think that it would be foolish not to, obviously, but sometimes employers don't have proper security or a team in place to explain it to them, to say, hey, we need to do these things because of X. Because we don't do it now, we're going to pay for it later.
Right.
Right. It's one of those things where you spend a little money up front to save some money on the back end. I haven't been doing private side too terribly long, but I think that you might see an uptick, just because, and to some degree, people are not used to working from home,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
They don't know that, hey, I need to make sure that my VPN is on when I do these things, right? So again, the human factor can be the weak link in that chain.
Yeah, I think that's always. It's typically that person sitting behind the keyboard that is kind of the weakest link, right? It's that person that's utilizing the mobile device that's typically, can be. So it's hard to take the human element out of it, or so which is kind of good, right? In an investigation, I'd hate to say that's the best part about it, because it'd be really difficult if, as we're finding out, especially devices and everything else with the encryption and everything's being locked down. Obviously it can be that can be an issue. So man,
Yep.
it's fantastic talking with you, man. I really appreciate you being on, and obviously, the best thing is now people know, man, you're a human being that's there, and as you have it with all the stuff that you've done for the community. So I do appreciate it, and which means that my beer is gone.
Mine is
So
actually gone too.
it goes by pretty quick, and I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Take care. Thanks for having me on.
Talk to you soon. Okay, fantastic. And another fantastic show. I do appreciate everyone obviously coming on to the show. Remember, if you want to be on the show, send me a DM or I'll hunt you down and find you as well. So again, Thank you guys very much. Enjoy the technical difficulties of me finding with the keyboard because that's just what I do. It's always a train wreck. So fantastic. And again, thank you guys and see you next week.